Should you be doing compound lifts? In this video, I'm going to explain why I think everyone, from beginners to advanced lifters, should be incorporating them into their routines, and why I think they're the foundation of a good workout routine, and why I think that if you're building a home gym, you should focus on getting equipment that allows you to do compound lifts at home. Good morning. Welcome to week 17, day 3. It's moderate push day, which means we have incline bench press, shoulder press, seated shoulder press with dumbbells, close grip bench press, lateral raises with dumbbells, and overhead tricep extension. I am feeling much better today. I got a little sick over the weekend. Still have a little congestion I'm fighting off, but much better energy. So being that this is already a moderate day, I will probably do the full workout. It's not meant to be a super intense one. Anyway, the topic for today is compound lifts. Your benches, your squats, your deadlifts, your overhead press, and your barbell rows. Those are what we're going to talk about. I know it's kind of ironic that we'll be talking about them, and I don't think I'm doing any of those today. The reason I thought about it though is yesterday I talked about, I described if I were going to start my home gym over, the equipment that I would start with, how I would spend the first $1,000. And it was basically get a barbell, get a squat rack, weights, and a bench, right? And when we looked at the Titan Fitness website, that came out to be just over $1,000 just for those things. So I was like, well, you've got to start somewhere, and that's maybe the cheapest that you could do it with decent quality, at least what I found. So, and I just mentioned offhand that one of the reasons I would focus on getting that equipment is so that I could do compound lifts, and because I believe that they are foundational, that they are one of the most beneficial types of lifts that you can do. And so today I just wanted to expand on that a little bit and talk about what I mean about them being foundational and beneficial. So we'll talk through the different compound lifts, why I think that they're great, some things that you might want to avoid and watch out for, ways that you can help keep yourself safe, a couple of different types of workout splits that incorporate them, and then what it looks like to incorporate these when you're a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So let me get set up for my first workout here, and then we'll start talking. We've got our first warm-up set. I've got about 50%. That's what I warm up with on my compound lifts, is 2 sets at 50%, 1 set at 75%. And that's the percentage of my working weight. And then we start the working sets. This is maybe a little over 50% because on the dumbbell incline bench press, the weight is a little bit lighter. But whoa. Just sometimes that first warm-up set can feel terrible, but on a day like today, it just feels like a nice, warm, good morning hug. It feels just good to move my muscles, stretch them out, pop a few of the bones. So first things first, I want to define terms. When I talk about compound lifts, we're talking about lifts that engage multiple muscle groups, and they're typically performed with the barbell. And so most people think of bench, squat, back squat specifically, and deadlift. Those are the big 3. Those are the ones used in powerlifting meets. But a lot also include overhead press with that, and even bent over rows sometimes get thrown in there as well. And I've got no problem throwing those in there. That's fine. So that's the definition I'm going to use today. We're going to talk about what everyone talks about with compound lifts, because I think that most people either oversimplify it or they overthink it. And so we're going to talk about maybe a middle path for how to incorporate these compound lifts into your strategy. We'll talk about a little bit of research. I don't have a bunch of papers and stuff like that, but then we'll talk about how and why that applies to every stage of your journey, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. And like I said, it'll be fun to talk about this as I do 0 compound lifts with the barbell. I'm doing incline bench, which is compound, but I'm doing it with dumbbells. So the irony is not lost on me. Yes, I do incorporate compound lifts on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. I do bench, deadlifts, and squats. I'm a big believer in them, but I would consider myself intermediate. Maybe not quite advanced, or maybe touching advanced. And so I'll talk about what that looks for me and why I don't just do one thing or another. I don't only do compound lifts. I don't only do isolated exercises. Getting ahead of myself here. So let's go back to the workout. Second warm up set. What sets compound lifts apart from other types of workout or exercises you do? Well, if you think about compared to a knee extension, like a quad extension or a single arm row or something like that, the big thing is that the compound lifts incorporate multiple joints and multiple muscle groups all working together. So think about bench, it's using your chest, it's using your delts, your triceps, and your lats are stabilizing. For squats, you're using your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes, your core, your erectors on your back. And deadlift is probably the most total body exercise that exists. You're using everything, just about. So the more muscle tissue that is involved per set, the more efficient that is going to be for hypertrophy and for strength building. And what I mean by efficiency, I'm just talking about in gaining volume per muscle group. And this is where that research comes in. So Schoenfeld et al. Points to total volume as being the driver of growth. So total volume, meaning how much weight you lift for how many sets per muscle group. That is the biggest determining factor for how much you grow. That combined with recovery, right? So compound lifts let you accumulate that across multiple muscle groups at once. So I'm a big fan of bang for buck, getting the most I can in the least amount of time, right? That's one of the reasons I program my schedule the way it is, my routine. I try to keep my workouts about an hour, give or take, because I don't have all the time in the world. I'm not trying to spend multiple hours in the gym each day. It's why I have a home gym. So compound lifts make sense for me personally, and I think for a lot of us when it comes to trying to be efficient with our workouts. Last warm-up set. Let's break down beginners and intermediate versus advanced lifters. The reason compound lifts are great for beginners is because most of your gains when you're a beginner are actually neurological. It's not muscular growth, right? You're actually building pathways to help you be more efficient and learning the movement and the coordination. And compound movements help you do that. You're recruiting lots of muscle groups, right? And you're coordinating and learning those. And a lot of those, if you think about bench press, that'll carry over to dumbbells. And same thing if you're doing squats, that'll carry over to unilateral movements and stuff like that. So that's why you see a lot of beginner programs focus on compound lifts. If you've ever heard of the 5x5 workout program, if you haven't, look it up. Maybe I'll do a video on it. I highly recommend it for beginners. You basically just only do compound lifts, and you just do that 3 days a week. And you have an A day, a B day, and a A day. And then the next week you do a B day, an A day, and a B day. And that's basically just like your bench, squat, and overhead press. And then it's like deadlift, rows, and something else. I forget. But anyway, you cycle between your compound lifts, and that's all you do. And you can see significant progress, both in strength and hypertrophy. And also, obviously, we talked about the neurological, like coordination. You can do just that program and have significant progressive overload for a long period of time before you are forced to basically move on to something more advanced. I also am a big fan of push-pull legs, right? That is geared towards a bench, deadlift, squat, right? It's in the name, push, pull, and legs. So that is another thing that you can program for a beginner very easily that includes mainly compound lifts. You're kind of focused around those main compound lifts, and you do some other things as well. So I love compound lifts for beginners. Helps you get used to the gym. It simplifies things by focus on one type of equipment, right? You're not having to worry about how to use different machines, how to modify different exercises. You just focus on, how do I make this barbell do the thing that I want it to do? And as we talked about before, super efficient. Get in and out, not going to spend a ton of time, and you can still get on with your life. All right, let's get our first working set of these incline presses. I've got 160 pounds by 8 listed on here as last week. I feel like at one point we were doing 170 pounds. So we'll see how it goes. If I do the 12, I'll probably go up in weight. Yeah, so we got 12. Hold it up. All right, let's get set 2. We have moved up to 170, and so really I'll be okay taking the reps down to 6. Can't really throw that down here on my plywood. Gotta be careful. When it comes to intermediate lifters, I think the temptation is to go one way or the other. You either abandon compounds and you go straight for and replace everything with machine work, or you become a compound fundamentalist and you stick to only doing that, right? And I think where growth happens is when you start to include accessory work and think about your compound work being as foundational, and think about doing accessories and maybe introducing unilateral work, single arm, single leg things to help overcome areas of weakness and imbalance. I'm going to sound like a broken record. I love push-pull legs because I can use my compound lifts as the foundation, and then I think about what areas do I want to specifically hit. So for me, I know my lats are not as big and wide as they should be. Looks terrible. Maybe some of that's just the shadow. But so I focus on making sure I'm doing vertical movements and horizontal pulling in addition to just regular barbell rows. So I'll do barbell rows to try and help with strength. But if I'm wanting to grow width, I'm focusing on accessory work. I do some single arm rowing as well with the cable machine. So this is why I would consider myself an intermediate, because I definitely see myself as using compound lifts as the foundation, but then I try and focus on areas of weakness that I try to improve with machine work or dumbbell work that is more isolated. Let's see. I think that's all I'll say about intermediate people. The tendency is to like, all right, I did 5x5 for a year. Now it's time for me to ditch compound lifts altogether. Or it can be like, I did 5x5 for a year. Now I need to move on to the next split, but I need to focus only on how can I do this with only my barbell. After a year, start to incorporate some dumbbell work and some cable machines. And if you're at a public gym, what are other machines that you can use? Don't abandon one for the other. How can they work together? All right, last set of these dumbbell and bench press. We always got overhead presses. Shooting for hundreds. I've got 110s listed, but it looks like I had to drop down to hundreds at one point. I think I've talked about this in the past, how I think when I do these on regular bench day, I can do more, but the incline bench with dumbbell seems to incorporate my shoulders more, and so they're a little bit weaker. So we'll keep it at hundreds or 50s, 100 total. All right, what about advanced lifters? How do compound lifts fit in? Well, if you're a strength lifter, you're in competition for powerlifting. It's literally the sport. So obviously you're going to want to incorporate those at high frequency and high volume. And the way that you incorporate other machines and stuff are going to be addressing weaknesses, the same as intermediate level lifters, but you're going to have very specific goals for increasing your ability to do those core lifts, right? So rather than just thinking about, oh, that muscle needs to look bigger like a bodybuilder, it's going to be, oh, how can I'm getting stuck at this point in my bench? What muscle group do I need to work on to increase the capability to not get stuck there? But even for bodybuilders, I think that there's still a lot of advantages of incorporating compound lifts, because even though you're definitely trying to grow certain muscles because you're trying to make sure you're symmetric and that things are balanced correctly, I think that when you're cutting, man, the energy expenditure that you get from doing these compound lifts is extremely efficient, as I mentioned before, especially when you talk about deadlifts and squats, man. You're using so much of your body, and so you're going to burn more calories, I think. Or let me put it this way, it's going to take longer to do isometric exercises and burn the same amount of calories. You can also get imbalanced by abandoning compound lifts altogether. So you can create imbalances by only doing cable and machine type of exercises. So that's just something to keep in mind. You obviously, as I mentioned, if you're bodybuilding or if you're strength building, your routine becomes really important to make sure that you're periodizing correctly, that you are planning for your peak week, that you're getting adequate nutrition, that you're getting adequate rest, that your recovery days are planned well, that you're not hitting the same muscle group day to day. And then just like your stimulus to fatigue ratio. So the amount of volume you're doing, whether you're you have to consider the total volume per muscle group, right? So if you are doing bench, you need to consider the fact that that is recruiting triceps and delts, right? And consider that into your volume when it comes to the higher end of what your trainable valuable volume can be. So that's just, when you're advanced, you know what that means, right? You're likely keeping track of your volume per muscle group per week, how many hard sets you're using, the total tonnage, whatever it is. So that's just something to be cognizant of, is when you're doing deadlifts, you're using a bajillion muscles. So how are you calculating volume for all of that? Let's get our second set of seated overhead dumbbell presses. What a name. Some people, I don't really know what the difference between this and military press is. I'll be honest. I've looked it up before and I have forgotten. I don't know. One of you all can let me know. All right, let's get one more of these. So going back to the conversation yesterday where I said, you can build a home gym for $1,000. It's a little cheeky. It didn't include the clips or flooring, but you can get a decent barbell, 70, 50 something pounds of weights. So enough to where you can get some deadlifts in. Certainly more than you'll need for bench to start, and a bench, right? And a squat rack. You can get all that. And you can get your basic compound lifts in. You can do a 5x5, or you can do a push-pull legs. But you can also, look at this. Let me show you. I'll just record it real quick, screen share. There are so many exercises you can do with just barbell. These are just the ones I've done in the past couple of weeks. Deadlift, bent over row, bench press, squat, single leg calf raises, close grip bench press, Romanian deadlift. But then look at this. You can do all kinds of bicep work, different variations on benches, different variations on rows and biceps, different variations on squats. We haven't talked about cleans at all. If you're like an athlete in a sport like football, cleans are great. That is a great way to work on explosiveness and power, right? If you just talk about regular clean, clean and jerk, clean and press, hang clean, power clean, all those, man. All you need is a barbell and some weights, right? So many of these different variations on these compound lifts. You can get a landmine attachment, and then you can do a whole other category of workouts. Work on your glutes, right? With a bridge, hip thrusters. So this is why I think that starting with just a barbell, some weights, a bench, and a power rack or a squat rack, it's a great way to start. You're going to be able to get a good workout for a long time without getting bored and without stalling. You're going to be able to progressively overload. And then as you go, just buy one or two things. Buy a landmine attachment. Buy a dip bar I've got. Get a pull-up bar to go across the top or whatever. As you grow and as you think about wanting to introduce new workouts, just buy one or two things. You don't have to drop another $1,000 every time you need to get something new. Except if you're maybe looking to get dumbbells. A decent set of dumbbells is going to be probably at least $500 to over $1,000. But so all that to say, I think compound lifts are the most bang for your buck when it comes to strength building and hypertrophy, but your workouts, but also just for literally the money. Close grip bench press. I have 175 marked on here, but I feel like I did 185. So maybe this is a mistake, but we'll see how we do here. I think I just marched the wrong weight last week when I did this. If you're new to the channel and this has been helpful information, please like and subscribe and make sure you stick around, because at the end of the workout, that's when I do my daily check-in. That is when I show you my weigh-in for the day and how my weight is averaging and if that's on track or not. And we look at my nutrition from the day before. I actually pull open my food tracking app, show you exactly how many calories I got, how much protein I got. I don't really track carbs and fat. I track them, they get tracked, but I don't really have targets for those. But you can see what they are, and then you can see exactly all of my food entries, what I ate the previous day, and whether I hit my calorie and protein targets or not, and then how I'm going to adjust if not. I do this because I wish that when I was starting on my fitness journey, when I realized how important calories and protein are, I wish I could see how someone was doing this. I just wanted to look over someone's shoulder and see, how do you actually track your food? What does that look like? So I think it's just as, if not more important for building the physique that you want, is keeping track of your food and hitting, having specific goals and targets. So stick around because we still have a few more lifts to do, but we will check in at the very end. Second set, close grip bench press, 185. Let's see if we can do 6 reps. Here are some practical takeaways from our compound lift discussion. If you're a beginner, you can get away with doing just squat, bench, deadlift, rows, and overhead press. You could probably do that for a year or more without having to add anything else. You can have, there's enough room for progressive overload within each of those groups and that time frame. If you haven't already, check out the 5x5 workout program. I think that it is a great place to start. If you're intermediate, I think anchor on those big 3, squat, bench, deadlift, and then fill in with accessory work where you feel like you need it. Either whether you're focusing on aesthetics or strength, fill in the gaps with accessory work. When you're advanced, you know what your goals are, right? You're powerlifting, you hit those compounds and all the variations needed to work on your strength goals. When you're bodybuilding, think about those as great tools for calorie burners when you're in a cut. And then always be thinking about your periodization, your rest and recovery, and your total volume, right? But don't abandon your first love, right? Your first love being the compound lifts. That's how I would consider it. So I am curious if this was helpful or interesting to you. Did I leave anything out? Any compound lifts that I didn't mention? Or anything I left? I think, you know what, one thing I will talk about when we come back after I do this lift, I'll talk about some risks with compound lifts, because we didn't. Well, folks, there's a first time for everything, and oh boy, sorry about this. This is all a mess. I forgot to empty my memory card on the camera, so while I offload that, I don't really have time to stop the workout, so I'm just going to try to record on my camera, on my phone. So I think this is the last set of close grip bench press. So I think I got cut off when I was saying this, but I was just mentioning how I wanted to talk about a couple of the risks with compound lifts before we ended the discussion. And that comes because I've just heard from some friends, and I know there's videos just talking about, as you age, how doing heavy lifts, heavy compound lifts, seem like dangerous. And I do want to acknowledge that lifting with bad form, with more weight than you can handle while fatigued is a recipe for injury. But I do think that there's compound lifts still serve a purpose. You can always lower the weight and do more reps. And I think that the average human body, right, exceptions were people with deficiencies and things like that excluded, the average human body should be able to handle the stress of these compound lifts adequately if done with proper form, right? Now, I think you do get into trouble when you try to go beyond your limits, but there's a big difference between doing 3 heavy singles on deadlift versus doing 4 sets of 10, right? I think there's a big difference in what that can look like. You're less likely to strain your back by doing lighter weight for more reps. Now, I do think if you get injured doing other things, now, as you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s, certainly beyond that, you get injured just doing other things, right? It might not even be the squat that injures you. You can tweak your back just by sleeping wrong. Like I've done that with my neck. You can be helping someone move. You can be doing something with your kids. And that can definitely inhibit your ability to do the compound lifts the way that you want to be doing. And you may have to modify or abandon those for a time. But I think on the whole, I believe that your body should be able to do these lifts well into your age, right? As you age, as long as you keep them up. And I think that it's just going to be so good. If you think about what these compound lifts are doing is they're engaging your central nervous system, your neuromuscular connection. They're helping your build muscle. And when you do that, you're also building bone density, which is one of the biggest indicators of being having good health in old age. So I think just don't take everything that someone says as gospel, me included. I think that this should work for you, but I know that there are exceptions. And there are people who are saying, no, you need to move to only doing lighter weight, single leg movements when you're in your 50s. And I just don't know if it's either one. I think it's going to depend on your body and your history. But my plan for myself is to try and do these types of workouts, these compound lifts as my foundation, my anchor for as long as possible and modify them as needed. So right now I'm able to do the strength reps or the 4 to 6 rep range for 3 or 4 sets. As I get older, I will probably increase the reps and decrease the weight just because it's more stress on your body to do that higher weight. So that's my plan. Not changing anything anytime soon though. So I talked about that a little bit longer than I wanted, and I hope I didn't offend anyone, but I also hope that maybe I provided a different perspective. And I'm not a medical doctor or professional physical therapist or anything like that. These are just my own thoughts and opinions, but hopefully they provide another opinion or perspective if you're scared about these types of lifts. I can dispel that fear. Up next, we've got lateral raises. I have no idea if I'm going to be in this shot completely or not. We'll see. Hi folks, back on our normal camera. Got the files offloaded and memory card cleared. We've got a couple more sets of these lateral raises. I think that's where I'm going to cut the workout. I'm going to cut it a little short just because I'm running up against time. So we will miss our overhead tricep extensions, which is not the end of the world. But I want to make sure I leave time for the daily check-in at the end. So here we go. To sum up our conversation on compound lifts, what I would say is you can see this line that draws through beginners, intermediate, and advanced lifters. And this is that compound lifts are efficient, they're functional, and they drive real progressive overload. And they force your whole system to work. The research consistently supports them as a foundation of any serious training program, and not because isolation work is bad, but because nothing else gives you as much return per hour in the gym. And this is why I love them. Bang for buck, baby. Bang for buck. All right, last set of lateral raises. This will be our last exercise of the day before our check-in. Let's do our check-in. Here we go. Weighed in at 185.5 today. You can see we are still coming down off of our increased water weight weekend, but getting closer. I think we maybe have a couple more pounds in us to drop this week. I know that seems crazy, but if you look at last week, I went down from 190 to 195.7, got into the 184s. So that's what I would like to see this week. To do that, I'm going to need to stick to my calorie goals. No more than 1,700, 15 or 1,600 for the next few days really is what I need to do. And we can look at the calories. Yesterday, we did just that, under 1,700 calories. It was low. It was high 1,500s, high 1,600s, but at the end of the day, I was hungry, so I snuck in this apple at the end. Also like this popcorn and orange that I had as a snack. And then I had this latte that I didn't need, but I had that earlier because I had some time to kill between appointments. The peppermint gum was a snack between meals to help fight off the urge for any kind of snacks. I'm going in reverse order here. A couple of cups of chicken noodle soup, some crackers. Lunch was pretty light, and it was actually later in the day, which I think kind of worked out for me because if I can just wait to eat, like that 3 o'clock time period is a little hard for me sometimes. So if I can just eat a little bit later, like 2 o'clock, that helps. But I actually got this turkey bolognese meal from a local place that does prepared meals. So that's something that I thought I would try that out. And it's kind of like Factor or whatever that you order pre-made meals and you heat it up, but it's just a local place. So I thought I'd try that out to help me stick to my calories. I just got a couple of those. I'll have one for lunch today. The peanut butter bliss bar is their dessert, higher calorie than maybe I need. So on the fence of whether I'll have one today. Yogurt. And then for breakfast was just my coffee. And then I had a bronze David bar earlier in the morning, and then I added this other David bar to breakfast, but it was much later in the morning, like 10 or 11 o'clock. As we saw earlier, just under 1,700 calories, almost 150 grams of protein. So close to my goals. My goal right now is 15 or 1,600 calories. 180 grams of protein is the goal, but that's really hard to shoot. It's really hard to get. For me, I have found that a realistic target is 10 grams of protein for every 100 calories. So if I'm only getting 15 or 1,600 calories, 150, 160 grams of protein is a more realistic goal for me without just only eating chicken breast, right? I think that's about the only way you can do that if you're just having chicken breast, broccoli, and rice for all 4 meals. So, well, we're going to basically just try and do the same thing today. Maybe I wouldn't be upset if I got this, even knowing I had this higher calorie little bar here and a couple of extra things like the orange and the latte and stuff. If I ended up at under 1,700 calories with 150 grams of protein today, I think that would be good. I think we'd be on track to lose another, continue shedding the water weight, and then hopefully also losing fat at the same time. That is it for the check-in. Let me know if you're curious about why I'm doing something or not doing something. As always, if this has been helpful, subscribe to the channel. I still have another, 3.5 weeks, including the half of this week left of the cut. Only 2.5 weeks before the powerlifting meet. Stay tuned for those things, because I think it'll be interesting to see how I do at the meet and then where we end up at the end of the 20-week cut. See you next time.